Support for Sustainability Defined comes from NLX, the makers of Juicebox, the best-selling electric car home charging station. The Juicebox smart charger enables EV drivers to charge their cars with the cleanest and cheapest energy available. More online at juiceboxstore.com.
Brew Dr. Kombucha is committed to helping people discover how good kombucha can be. Their refreshing, authentic kombucha is made from 100% organic ingredients, and the company is proud to be a certified B Corporation. Check out Brew Dr. Kombucha, that's brewdrkombucha.com to learn more. All right, Definers, welcome back to Sustainability Defined, where Scott and I are here defining sustainability, one concept and one bad joke at a time. This is an update to episode 32, which we did on reversing global warming. But before we get too far, Scott, Happy New Year. Happy 2021.
Thanks, Jay. It's going to be a subdued celebration that we're going to have. I think we're having like just a couple friends over outside on the covered deck. So hopefully next year we can do a real New Year's celebrations. Hopefully, Jay, next year you and I can meet up in person and do some fun stuff together.
Oh, I love that. So on the topic of goals, any New Year's resolutions for this year, Scott?
I want to be better at, this is kind of a dorky goal, but actually like project management and document. Like I do such a bad job at work of just like saving stuff and not organizing it really well and keeping track of all my tasks and like seeing the big picture and not just getting caught up in my day to day. Maybe others don't have this problem, but I feel like I can do a better job of that.
Scott, all I'm saying is I have access to your calendar as we plan out our schedules. You seem to have it on lock from my perspective, but
the calendar is fine.
All the Definers, and I wish you the best for 2021. Well, Scott, I will say I hope my boss isn't listening to this. I hope I'm decent enough at file organization and all these tasks you're talking about. But my goal is to read more fiction. I think, there's so much nonfiction. And Scott, you and I like to stay up on all news when it comes to, just political stuff, world stuff, but also sustainability stuff. But I think it's important to get some fiction in there. So that's my goal.
My girlfriend, it's a kind of running joke. She once said to me something like, if you ever have any literature questions, you can just ask me, sort of thing. Because I don't read much fiction, and she's so smart in many senses, but she really knows her stuff when it comes to like just fiction and literature, and it just was funny. She didn't mean it in a mean way, but it was just like I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I haven't read any books, so that's good that I can come to you with such questions.
Nice. Well, maybe everyone listening can say, well, hey, Shannon, I would love a personalized fiction list as well. Yeah.
Well, if people Instagram us or whatever, what's the tweet at us version of Instagram? Is there such a thing?
Tag us? I think it's called tag us.
All right. If they tag us and want Shannon to give a recommendation, maybe we'll have her do it.
Deal. All right. So, Scott, as we start to transition into this episode, we do want to say that this is a little bit of a break for us, January 2021.
Yeah.
We've had a crazy busy end of 2020, and we've got a lot of fantastic episodes in the queue for 2021. So this is a little bit of a stop, catch our breath, take a little bit of a break, and then dive right back on in there. So long-time listeners, Definers, this is going to sound a little bit familiar.
But we have an update, and it's got some good stuff in it for this.
We've got some good stuff coming up.
Like, October 2020, this, so it's recent stuff that we've got here at the top.
Right. Could we call this like warming back up really delicious leftovers, Scott?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're going to add a couple new things, but the dish, I swear, is going to be just as tasty. So
yeah,
as we transition, folks, we released an episode titled Reversing Global Warming in June 2018, where we focused on the book Project Drawdown and featured an interview with its author, Paul Hawken. The book Project Drawdown was published in 2017, and it ranked and detailed the top 100 solutions to climate change that will eliminate carbon from our atmosphere.
Right. And Jay, since we last talked with Paul, Project Drawdown has been busy. First of all, you're not going to find that list of 100 solutions on his website anymore. They now break down the solutions into 3 buckets. Always good to have buckets. Sources, sinks, and society. So with sources, it's basically reducing or removing the actions that are the cause of carbon emissions. You can think about electricity, buildings, transportation. But then the second bucket is sinks. So not the things that are causing the carbon emissions, but the things that can take in the carbon. You can often find these in nature. Think about soil, think about oceans, but there's also engineered sinks that remove and store carbon. And the third bucket is society, fostering equity. The major bucket here is health and education.
And Scott, a quick shout out to episode 47 on soil carbon, which is one of the sinks you just mentioned.
Nice.
So, folks, don't worry though. Drawdown still ranks the solutions by impact on their website. We're linking right to it on our intro notes on our website. When you go there, you'll see that they have two different scenarios that they're ranking these solutions by. One scenario is in line with a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise by 2100. And another scenario that is in line with a 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise by the year 2100. So we're just going to break these down quickly so you know what you're getting into as you dive into this further. The 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario shows onshore wind turbines, utility scale solar photovoltaics, and reduced food waste as the top three solutions in terms of gigatons of CO2 equivalent reduced or sequestered. The 2 degrees Celsius scenario shows reduced food waste in addition to health and education and plant-rich diets as the top three solutions.
And Jay, that 2 degrees Celsius doesn't involve as much emission reduction or storage as the 1.5 degree, right? That's the one that's more ambitious.
Right. You can think about it as the 1.5 degree being a little bit more aggressive than the 2 degree, and we'll kind of touch on why those might be different as far as solutions go. So again, listeners, we're linking to these in our show notes, and all of the solutions that Project Drawdown puts forward, and I think which is why a lot of folks really are motivated by them, is because they are, number one, plausible, and number two, economic. And so, Scott, as we're discussing these top solutions by scenario, it can be a little confusing why they change a little bit. So we know that Drawdown is all about implementing solutions, as we said, that are plausible and economic. And each scenario requires a certain amount of emissions to be reduced or stored to achieve a temperature reduction goal. The solutions that are most economical actually fluctuate depending on the scenario. So consider how certain solutions are better positioned to achieve high amounts of emissions reduction or storage at a lower cost. And also consider how some solutions may quickly achieve a certain amount of emissions reduction or storage and then kind of just flatten off, not really deliver much more without another high degree of effort.
Yeah, Jay, this is reminding me of the refrigerant management solution where you could see in scenario one, they had a certain amount of emission reduction attributed to it. And then in scenario two, when we need more emission reduction or storage, this is the 1.5 degrees Celsius one, it was the same amount because you had basically tapped out that solution. So I think as people go on there, they can toggle in the different scenarios and see which ones are the top and how much increased emission reduction or storage they're attributing to each. It will make more sense.
Right. I think that's a perfect plug, Scott. So folks, keep in mind that this is very much a living document. So certainly keep checking their website because we know things will change as Drawdown continues to research and refine their models.
So another update that we want to tell the listeners about here is that Project Drawdown is also now engaging the private sector in a big way. In October 2020, it announced Drawdown Labs, a consortium of private sector partners working to go beyond net zero to scale climate solutions in the world within and outside their own operations. So in short, Project Drawdown is challenging the business world to go beyond, quote, do less harm. They're asking companies to go beyond their own footprints and bring their resources, employees, and influence to solve the problem. Google, Lime, IDEO, many others, they're already involved in this Drawdown Labs.
So this new solution categorization and impact modeling that we're discussing here is detailed in the Drawdown Review, which was published in 2020 and represents Project Drawdown's best assessment of climate solutions for 2020. They anticipate regular publications going forward, so again, be on the lookout for more from Project Drawdown. The top 10 insights are listed at the beginning of the review. We want to share two of them here. So number one refers to this drawdown point. So quickly, drawdown is the future point in time when levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop rising and start to steadily decline. Drawdown says that we can reach this point. We can reach drawdown by mid-century if we scale the climate solutions that we already have at hand. The second insight from the 2020 review is that climate solutions are interconnected as a system, and therefore we really need all of them, not just one.
Right, and that's why it's interesting, Jay. I'd really encourage the listeners to check out that solutions page where you can toggle on the different scenarios. It's interesting to see how they've delegated out the amount of emissions necessary to each one.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see how they're not just like, here's the one that's going to, like, this is the silver bullet. Not the case. You need all of them. What they say in this drawdown review, the thing they just published in 2020, is that the original 2017 list, the one that had the big book, that got all the fanfare that we interviewed Paul Hawken about, they say in that review that the solutions content in the original book remains robust and relevant, and its broader lessons still hold. That's what they said. So that means the content in our original Reversing Global Warming episode, it's still robust and relevant as well as urgent. So we first dive deep in that episode from 2018 into what it means to reverse global warming and Project Drawdown's initial most impactful project list. Then we interview Paul Hawken, who shares further insights with us and explains how Project Drawdown came to be.
And for more recent podcast interviews with Project Drawdown folks, you can check out a couple of resources that we are going to link in our show notes. Number one is a June 2020 interview with Dr. Jonathan Foley, who is the executive director of Project Drawdown. This interview was featured on the Michigan Climate Action Network. And the second piece is a November 2020 interview with Crystal Chisel, Director of Partnerships.
Great name.
Great. Fantastic name. Director of Partnerships at Project Drawdown on WORT 89.9 FM based in Madison, Wisconsin. Scott, I feel like a radio host. WORT 89.9 FM. Thanks for tuning in.
And now a word from our sponsors. All right, definers, which, Jay, I hope people are catching on. That's what we're calling our listenership these days. We're now going to go into this 2018 episode. It's been one of our most popular. I think you're going to enjoy it. And I hope you enjoyed the update here. We're going to have a bunch of new episodes for you coming up next month to start. So with that, Jay, let's get into it.
All right. All right, listeners, welcome back to Sustainability Defined, where Scott and I are here defining sustainability, one concept and one bad joke at a time. This is episode 32 on reversing global warming, featuring Scott, another one of our huge sustainability celebrity gets, Paul Hawken of Project Drawdown.
The gets keep coming, Jay. The gets keep coming. So, Jay, give the listeners some updates prior to getting into our intro.
Right, we've got a couple to run through. Number one, for those that haven't noticed yet, we have an expanded website. It's got a fresh look, and all of the episodes have their own landing pages, which means you can listen through your browser, and it should make the URLs to specific episodes much easier to share. Number two is we have an upcoming listener survey we'd like to get your feedback on. We want to know how we can make the podcast better, and of course, learn more about you, our beloved listeners.
So you can fill this out with the link we'll send you in our newsletter. If you're not signed up for that, you can do it on the website. There'll be a banner at the top of our website, and you can also find it with a link in the episode description.
That's right. And of course, I want to remind listeners of some travel I have coming up. I would love to meet up. In fact, from our last episode intro, we had some folks reach out from Munich, Amsterdam, London, and Cuba. So an amazing swath of places that I would love to visit. If you're in anywhere else and would like to meet up, maybe I'll buy the coffee. Maybe it's a beer. Who knows? Reach out.
So you're like planning. You're not necessarily going to these, but you want new locations to go.
Yeah. No. I mean, there's a open period of travel coming up, and I just think it'd be so cool to connect with people out there and maybe bring them on the show.
Okay. Any preferences?
As far as locations, I think if we could incorporate a white sandy beach, that would be phenomenal.
Fair.
On top of global travel, we also want to renew our call for researchers and editors. So if you are interested in joining Sustainability Defined, helping us churn out our well-cited introductions or making us sound as crisp as possible, let us know and reach out to hosts@sustainabilitydefined.com. We'd love to onboard some new people.
All right, listeners. So on this episode, our chief focus is going to be Project Drawdown. This is an organization that recently released a noteworthy book of the same name. And this book, it details ways to reverse global warming. And what's so cool about this episode and Project Drawdown is that many of the solutions are ripe for growth. They could be episodes in their own right. More importantly, hearing about these solutions to global warming, they're going to give you hope that we can actually beat this thing that I know is weighing down on so many of us.
Ourselves included.
So, Jay, what are we going to cover in the intro?
We are first going to start off with square one, which is what really is the problem of global warming. And then we will ask, what will it take to actually reverse it? We will then move into discussing different approaches to reversing global warming before we get more specific with Paul Hawken and Project Drawdown's approach to reversing global warming. Then we'll dive into examples of what's on the top 80 list of solutions and highlight some coming attractions, and then touch on Paul Hawken's background before transitioning into our amazing interview. So, Scott, as we...
If you do say so yourself.
And I am an unbiased observer, but
Yeah,
Scott, to get things rolling, why don't you remind us what these pesky little problems are that are associated with global warming? I think Paul might call them opportunities, but let's start there.
All right, so first off, as an overview, the U.S. average temperature has increased by 1.3 degrees to 1.9 degrees Fahrenheit since record-keeping began in 1895. Most of this warming has occurred since about 1970, and the most recent decade was the nation's warmest on record. So we've got warming here, and it's happening at an increasing rate.
And as a reminder, while surface air temperature is the most widely cited measure of human-induced climate change, it's really just one metric. So the impacts are much more vast and include the following. Number one is an increase in extreme weather. One example is these excessively high temperatures. Number two are public health crises. These include an increased risk of respiratory stress from poor air quality.
Number three is damage to infrastructure, think sea level rise, among other effects. Another is decrease in surface and groundwater supplies from declining groundwater recharge and a variety of other reasons.
Okay, so with those now fresh in mind, let's discuss what it would take to actually reverse global warming. So when I saw Paul Hawken speak in San Francisco right before I roped him in to come and join us on Sustainability Defined, he made a point of beginning his presentation with a jarring graph. It displayed the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as measured in parts per million over the last 400,000 years. And you can probably guess where this is going to go. You see some pretty consistent fluctuations over that time span, with peaks and troughs that repeat roughly every 100,000 years and that range from 150 parts per million to just under 300 parts per million. Then, all of a sudden, you see a massive vertical spike at the end of the graph, which nears 400 parts per million, which is essentially off the charts. And Paul makes a good point of saying that no human being in any shape or form, including primate forms, our cousins, our hairier cousins, have existed on this earth when the levels of CO2 are over 300 parts per million. So really anyone who says what will happen above that 300 parts per million threshold is really just speculating, that we really don't know what's going to happen.
First off, Jay, do you have hairy cousins?
The truth comes out. I have hairy cousins.
It sounds you must have some, because there's some that are hairier than others, apparently. But Jay, you're saying that it has never been above 300 parts per million, our humans, and now we're over 400. So,
that's right.
And this would have been a nice visual, and this graph certainly exists online, but I think you did a nice job, Jay. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
So when we talk about reversing global warming, we need to go way beyond mitigation, stabilization, and net zero carbon emissions. As Paul says, we are so far beyond what our species has ever encountered or lived with. We need to both directly address carbon emission sources, and we need to expand our efforts to actually draw that carbon out of the atmosphere. So when we say reversing global warming, we mean actually reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere.
And of course, Scott, there are other greenhouse gases that can be considerably more potent than CO2. For example, methane warms the planet 86 times as much as carbon dioxide, but for the purposes of this episode, we're going to focus mostly on carbon dioxide. So, Scott, let's branch now into the different approaches to actually reversing global warming.
Right. So, Jay, naturally, as any proactive optimist would ask, well, how can we actually reverse this? And there are a few approaches to touch on. Number one is mitigation. This is what Paul described as simply not enough. but it's still an important first step. So mitigation, it refers to efforts to reduce or prevent emission of greenhouse gases associated with our current way of life. So how are we living our lives that generates emissions, and how can we reduce that? So it could be new technologies, renewable energy, making older equipment more energy efficient, or changing management practices or consumer behavior.
Number 2 is carbon sequestration. This refers to both natural and deliberate processes by which carbon dioxide is either removed from the atmosphere or diverted from emission sources and stored in the ocean, in terrestrial environments, and in geologic formations. This really is the next natural step from mitigation. So after you slow down or stop emissions from existing sources, you then turn to ways to draw existing greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere.
Number 3 is geoengineering, arguably the boldest approach to reversing global warming. This is kind of the crazy cousin. Maybe he's hairy, maybe he's not. Geoengineering, it refers to deliberate, large-scale intervention in the Earth's natural systems to counteract climate change. So carbon dioxide removal could be part of this if it's done on a large scale like this, but this category also references things like solar radiation management, which involves reflecting a small proportion of the sun's energy back into space. So some of the stuff, it's interesting to think about and it's creative, but the concern people have a lot about geoengineering is that it could lead to other effects that we're not even thinking about. Because once you play with one part of the system, another part of the system could get out of hand.
That's right, the whole domino phenomenon. But let's move on to Project Drawdown's approach, now with those 3 approaches in mind. So Project Drawdown, which is, of course, spearheaded by Paul Hawken, maps, measures, models, and describes the 100 most substantive solutions to global warming. So for each solution, Drawdown describes its history, the carbon impact it provides, its relative cost and savings, its path to adoption, and of course, describes how it works. So the goal of that research that really underlies all of Project Drawdown is to determine if we can reverse the buildup of atmospheric carbon within 30 years.
And what's important to emphasize here, Jay, is that all solutions modeled in Project Drawdown, they're already in place, they're well understood, analyzed based on peer-reviewed science, and are expanding around the world. We're not placing our bets on some currently uninvented technology to save the day. These things exist. We're not hoping that Superman shows up with his ice breath power. Apparently this is a thing, Jay.
It surprised me. I was watching, I think it was Justice League, and Superman rolls up and like opens his mouth and out comes, anti-global warming frost. But,
I thought Superman was just super strong.
No, Scott, come on. He can fly. He's got the laser eyes. And clearly he's got breath as if he just downed a whole pack of Mentos or something.
All right, fair. But what I don't get is the last thing here on this. The Batman vs. Superman movie. I feel like Superman should wipe the floor with Batman. Like, how's that even a 2-hour movie? Batman is just a dude.
How is that a 2-hour movie? That's credit to Hollywood there, because truthfully, I have no idea. I mean, it should be instantaneous, but I don't know. Ben Affleck might not like that.
All right, back to Drawdown.
Let's move into examples of Project Drawdown's most impactful solutions. So we're going to quickly first run down their top 10 solutions before examining a few more in detail. So, Scott, this is the opportunity I've been waiting for to put on my David Letterman hat. So here we go. The top 10 examples of Project Drawdown's most impactful solutions. Number 10, rooftop solar. Number 9, silvopasture, which is the integration of trees and pasture into a single system for raising livestock. I was previously unfamiliar with that term. Number 8, solar farms. Number 7, family planning. Number 6, educating girls. Number 5, tropical forest restoration. Number 4, eating plant-rich diets. Number 3, reducing food waste. Number 2, onshore wind turbines. And the number 1 example of Project Drawdown's most impactful solutions, refrigerant management. How do we feel about that, Scott?
I love it. I also feel like we need a drummer on staff.
Yeah, that's right. So actually, listeners, in addition to researchers and editors, we are going to place a call out there for drummers. So send us your tapes. We'll review and let you know.
Nice. Okay. And Jay, I didn't expect educating girls to be so high on the list, which from what I can tell, it's a pretty common reaction that people are surprised to see this there. Project Drawdown gives a whole host of reasons why this is so important. For one, women with more years of education have fewer and healthier children, which means less humans having an impact on the earth. So, Jay, I'm thinking this should really be a future episode for us, women's economic empowerment and its relation to sustainability. And if listeners want more info on this or any of the solutions we're talking about, Drawdown has a great website on this. It's just www.drawdown.org, and you can find out more info there.
Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into their top 3 solutions. So if we recall, number 1 was refrigerant management, which touches on managing things like CFCs and HFCs, which have huge global warming potentials and can leak from things like faulty air conditioners. So over 30 years, containing 87% of refrigerants that are likely to be released could avoid emissions equivalent to 89.7 gigatons of carbon dioxide. For more on that, you can check out episode 2, which was on HFCs.
Yeah, so we did our second episode on the number 1 thing. Just throwing that out there. And
hey.
By the way, we are talking gigatons of carbon dioxide because that is how Project Drawdown quantifies it. We want to give you a sense of how much this means, so one way to think about it is that a reduction of just 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide emissions is equivalent to taking 211 million cars off the road for 1 year. So that's just 1 gigaton.
Right, and that's an awesome visual to have in mind. So keep that in mind as we're running through the next 2. So number 2 was onshore wind turbines. And Project Drawdown maintains that an increase in onshore wind from about 4% of world electricity use today to 21.6 by 2050 could reduce emissions by 84.6 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And this is what's cool from a financial perspective. At a cost of $1.23 trillion, wind turbines deliver net savings of $7.4 trillion over 3 decades of operation, which is a pretty solid ROI.
Love that ROI.
Always.
So number 3 is reducing food waste. And this one's nice because this is something you, everyone listening can do something about. A third of the food raised or prepared does not make it to our forks. Producing uneaten food, it squanders a whole host of resources: seeds, water, energy, fertilizer, labor. Every time you throw something out or let something go bad, all this stuff just goes to waste. And it generates greenhouse gases at every stage, including methane when organic matter lands in our landfills. So after taking into account the adoption of plant-rich diets, Drawdown's number 4 solution, they found that if 50% of food waste is reduced by 2050, avoided emissions could be equal to 26.2 gigatons of carbon dioxide. And if you want more on food waste, check out episode 6.
In addition to the 10 we ran down, as well as the 70 other solutions that are on Project Drawdown's list, they also include an additional 20 coming attractions, which are solutions that are forthcoming and close at hand. So some of our favorites on top of well-known inclusions like the smart grid include the following. Scott, start us off.
So one is artificial leaf. Daniel Nocera, a Harvard professor of energy science, successfully created energy-dense fuel by combining solar energy, water, and carbon dioxide. There's no actual leaf here. Rather, an engineered bacteria is used to consume hydrogen and carbon dioxide to synthesize fuel. And when they feed pure carbon dioxide into this process, it's 10 times more efficient at energy production than photosynthesis. So that's where the whole leaf thing comes in. And Jay, leave it to a Harvard professor to come up with a solution so advanced.
Scott, that joke is so bad it's as if you planted it there.
Yeah, but I don't think it's growing too well.
Speaking of growing too well, let's move on to our second favorite coming attraction, which is feeding cows with kelp. And no, I did not misstate that. So building on anecdotal evidence from dairy farmers, a team of scientists in North Queensland, Australia, have tested a wide range of seaweeds mixed with feed in artificial cow stomachs. And one species in particular of red algae reduced methane production by 99%. And of course, as a lovely reminder, livestock and cows especially produce quite a bit of methane via belches and farts. Holy cow.
And by the way, it's mostly the burps apparently that are the source of the methane emissions, but we did want to say farts, so mission accomplished.
Check that off the list. So Scott, as we transition now into our interview with Paul Hawken, why don't you give us a little bit on his background?
So Paul is an author and an activist. He has founded successful, ecologically conscious businesses. He's also consulted with heads of state and CEOs on economic development, industrial ecology, and environmental policy. The man's also written 7 books, including 4 national bestsellers: The Next Economy, Growing a Business, The Ecology of Commerce, and Blessed Unrest. I don't know when this guy has blessed rest, or rest period, but he's active.
He's active, and we haven't even finished. So Paul has served on the board of many environmental organizations, including the Center for Plant Conservation, Shelburne Farms, the Trust for Public Land, Conservation International, and the National Audubon Society. The guy is active. He is putting forward some pretty impressive stuff, and we are excited to talk with him here coming up in our interview. Let's go.
Support for Sustainability Defined comes from NLX, the makers of JuiceBox, the best-selling electric car home charging station. The JuiceBox can charge an EV up to 13 times faster than other home charging stations. JuiceBox's smart charging Wi-Fi features also help drivers charge with the cheapest and cleanest energy available. Schedule car charging when electricity rates are lower, or with JuiceNet Green software, charge with the cleanest energy on the grid. Sync your EV charging to times when solar and wind power are at maximum production and fossil fuel power sources are at a minimum. More online at juiceboxstore.com.
Brew Doctor Kombucha stands apart as a kombucha company steeped in tea heritage and commitment to using business as a force for good. The company takes inspiration from its custom tea blends, making deliciously refreshing, authentic kombucha with a difference you can taste. During these unprecedented times, BrewDoctor has partnered with distilleries to transform the alcohol they remove from their kombucha during the creation process into hand sanitizer. So far, they've donated over 500 gallons of hand sanitizer to nonprofits who need it and expect to donate thousands more. BrewDoctor's mission is to help people discover how good tea and kombucha can be, referring not only to its quality approach, but to the company's commitment to its communities, its people, and the planet. BrewDoctor Kombucha is proud to be the first national kombucha company to become both carbon neutral and a certified B Corporation. Check out BrewDoctor Kombucha, that's brewdrkombucha.com to learn more. All right, Definers, we are in a conversation with another sustainability celebrity. You might have heard of him. His name is Paul Hawken. He is the visionary behind Project Drawdown, which I think is a source of inspiration for a wide number of sustainability enthusiasts out there. So before we start this conversation, Paul, we want to thank you so very much for joining us on the show.
Hey, thank you both for inviting me and for taking this time.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. And so we want to start with some background questions so people can get to know you a bit. So in the 1960s, you started what became Erewhon Trading Company, and now you've written several books, several of which involve the intersection of business and the environment. So where did this interest in sustainability begin? Was it something someone said, an experience you had? What was it?
I think I've asked myself the same question. It started young, for sure, like 9, 10 years old. But I think, being a member of the Sierra Club and meeting David Brower when I was young and just being raised in a family where we did a lot of camping and we're outside a lot and rock climbing and beaches and stuff like that. And then seeing that as habitat, as good habitat, and then seeing the incursions, the roads, the strip malls, the destruction, in California, because California in my lifetime has grown, 5x. And so watching it, just county by street, by city, by neighborhood being, bulldozed and developed.
So Paul, we're going to transition a little bit because, I can also relate to that sprawl type development that you saw in California. I grew up in Denver and you could see it stretching outward, which is one of these negative external factors that we see as we're interested in sustainability. But let's shift now to the positive, which is what I think is so powerful about this Project Drawdown. So Scott and I are familiar with the basics of the Drawdown origin story, but For those of our listeners who perhaps are not quite as familiar, could you walk us through how that idea was conceived and then developed?
It started in 2001 when the third Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment came out, the IPCC assessment. They come out every 3-4 years. And this is the third, and it was, more pessimistic or dire, if you will, than the second, which was more pessimistic than the first. And it's continued to be so through the fourth and fifth assessment. And I think that was sobering. And at that time, I became familiar with the Princeton Carbon Mitigation Project, which was the famous global wedges that were, if adopted, could then basically stabilize emissions by 2050. And these wedges comprise 15 solutions. And there was a lot of talk about it and a lot of sense, I think, of hope and like, wow, we have a handle on this. And I read the solutions, and of the 15 that were proposed, 11 could only be adopted by the boards of directors of very conservative large corporations, energy, utility, car, appliance, mostly energy and utility. And they were all financially underwater. And that means we're asking the conservative boards of directors of very conservative companies to spend down their balance sheet and be, in a sense, liable at a fiduciary level, which I didn't think was going to happen. Knowing business. And so I began to go around then and say, do we know what we can do? Because there were proposals, but we weren't doing them and we couldn't afford to do them. And going to NGOs and institutions and saying, we need to know where we stand. I don't know where we stand. Do you know where we stand? Can we do this? Can we surmount this extraordinary problem? And I wanted then, as we eventually did, but to list the 100 top solutions to reversing global warming. And I think more importantly than just listing them, I wanted to name the goal within which they were listed, which is at that time and to this day, the goal is often spoken of as mitigation or stabilization or curbing. You hear these verbs and they don't make any sense given the gravity of the science and the havoc that the increase and the rate of increase of greenhouse gases will have upon the climate and weather, of course, and then crop and droughts and rain and refugees. I mean, and oceans and acidification. I mean, the science is really good on this. And rather than dwell on the science, which is being done very well then and now, what I want to do is understand what we could do about it. And I just felt like, and I think other people to this day feel the same, which is that you get the sense that if we can just clean up our energy act, that if we can go to clean energy, and that includes electric vehicles, but of course wind and solar, that basically we've kind of got it locked. We can do other things and they're important too, of course, and that's just not true. And even though energy is the biggest contributor, the combustion of fossil fuels, the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases, the way out is not the way in is not the way out. I mean, just that doesn't mean reversing that is going to solve the problem. But I just feel like we have a very narrow sense of possibility. And from my point of view, every problem is possibility in disguise. And the reason we have a problem is for us to wake us up, whatever the problem is, to what the possibility is. And so in 2001, I was suggesting that we should really figure this out in a collaborative way. And people said, we don't know how to do it. And I said, they asked me to do it. I said, I don't know how to do it. And it kind of let it lay for after 2 years of trying to convince other people to do it. I just forgot about it. Nobody was interested. And until 2013, when Bill McKibben's piece, Global Warming's Terrifying New Math, came out in Rolling Stone. The article was really aptly named Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. And it terrified people. And people came to me. I read it and I was like, ooh, it's kind of being socked in the stomach, It's like, but people came to me and said, who are activists, like people like yourselves and who really care about this and active in sustainability and climate change and said, it's game over. We tried, we worked hard, but we failed, and it's game over. And people came to me independently using that same term, game over. And I thought it was so interesting. And I decided then that when people give up, actually it's really usually game on. In other words, the other way around, that when we surrender in a way that we're more open to possibility than when we know. And anyway, so I decided to get together with a small group of friends and create Project Drawdown with no money, and that's really how it came about. But I think the point thing is that what we weren't trying to do is, like I said, save the earth. Like we're not saviors. We're not here to follow us. What we're trying to do is reflect back to the world what it knows and what it's doing, and to show that we are on the case, that we are brilliant, that we're imaginative, that we're innovative, and that humanity really cares. And I don't think that's the news we get.
Right. So Project Drawdown, as you're saying, it's not like you all have a million researchers on staff and doing your own research. You're looking at what data is out there, and you have these fellows who have put it together, and advisors and people that are looking at it to make sure it's correct. And you ranked those 80 solutions in your book by total atmospheric CO2 equivalent reduction. And we've heard a number of interviews with you, and people often ask about food waste and educating women and things like that, and those are great. But we're wondering, are there any of those 80 that people don't really ask you about too much? And you're like, why is no one asking me this? This is a really interesting one. Is there one that maybe people aren't asking you enough about that you want to tell our listeners about?
When we sort of hit the total button February 17, 2 months before the book was published, to see what the numbers were, I would say we were all very surprised at the ranking of the solutions. It was completely different than anything we would have presupposed when we began. But I suppose having like silvopasture was at number 9, is definitely one where, people say, what? Silvo means tree, and pasture is pasture. I mean, it's, putting trees in grasslands and basically when you intermix ruminants, sheep, goats, and cattle, together in pasture lands where you have trees, you get much, much more carbon sequestration. In other words, you bring carbon back home instead of emitting it. You get better water retention, you get better productivity, you get healthier animals, you enhance biodiversity. The wins just keep coming on that one. And when we looked at silvopasture and the rate it's being adopted and the rate it could be adopted over the next 30 years, it became number 9. So I think that was a surprise. But I think the whole list, the sequencing of them was a surprise to us.
So, Paul, when we hear you discuss basically the analytical approach to Project Drawdown, it's clear that you guys have been pretty conservative in your modeling assumptions. You're saying we're taking external data that has been verified, and we are doing this in a very calculated way that does not assume any kind of outlandish uptake or just astronomical takeoff of some magic solution. So when we have those in mind, and as Scott and I were going through the list of these 80 solutions, I think we found it pretty telling that some of the most common suggested solutions relative to sustainability actually ranked kind of low on the list. We're talking things like cars, which was 49th, recycling paper, which was 70, and then, I'm in real estate, so this was surprising to me, net zero buildings and energy retrofits, which were 79th and 80th, which, and as I look at this list, it suggests to me that we need to think about these impactful solutions that are going to make these bigger dents on a little bit larger of a scale than what we're used to operating on, more than just changing those LED lights or recycling your paper. Has that been something that a reaction that you've received frequently with your book, or maybe that surprised you too?
Well, yes and no. We did model conservatively in the sense that when on the greenhouse gas, the CO2 equivalent level, we looked at the science and the peer-reviewed literature and where there's divergence, which there often is with respect to land use, then we would always do a sensitivity analysis. I'm geeking out here. The sensitivity analysis and take the low median number. Okay, so for statistical reasons and to be conservative. On the economic side, we use very conservative numbers on what we call the learning rate. And the learning rate is what we would describe as basically how fast does the cost go down. And we use very conservative numbers on that. And again, it was IEA and World Bank stuff. And so we didn't want criticism from people saying, oh, you've exaggerated, you've hyped it, because there is a lot of that going on in the environmental movement. They're taking single solutions and describing them as panaceas and really ascribing impacts to them which are way, way over any reasonable number you could come to using just good analytic and scientific methodology. So that's true. That's what we did. And so we haven't had one gotcha, over a year from a scientist or economist saying, you egg the pudding, you screwed up here, you dropped a decimal point or whatever, So
which is really impressive, honestly, for the scale of this work and its distribution. I think that's pretty impressive.
It is. I mean, we chose the conservatism because we have had criticism, and the criticism has been, you're too conservative, and we just grin ear to ear when we hear that, because that's what we want people to say. No, it's better than that, and it's true. It is better than that. Now, to your question specifically, when you model something like this, you have to model it against something. Model against what? Well, you're doing the future. Well, there are business as usual models within the IEA and the IPCC and the World Bank, which is, this is how many people are coming, and this is what they'll want, and this is what they'll buy, and this is their energy use, and this is where their energy will come from, etc. So when you model, in this case us, when you model something like this, you have to model against that. You have to push against something that is established, as to what will happen in the future. But when it comes to electric vehicles, which is one of your questions, no question, that they have a really big impact on reducing fossil fuel use is unbelievable. At the same time, all the projections are that the number of vehicles in the world will double by 2050 to 2 billion. And so that really wipes out a lot of the gains you get, because you're doubling the number of vehicles on Earth. With recycled paper, it just takes a lot of energy to recycle it and remake it. It's really important for the health of the forests, no question about it. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't, in a sense, take a lot of energy itself, which is mostly fed right now by fossil fuel energy. So, and that phases out over 30 years, so it doesn't have a big impact. In terms of net zero buildings and retrofit, they're 79 and 80 because we ascribe no impact to them. And the reason we ascribe no impact to them is because all the components of that are in other solutions. So it's not like they rank low, it's just that we put them there because, and I think if you read the impact statement, in the book, you'll say, the impact is throughout the solutions. If net zero buildings was a solution where we had LEDs and, smart glass and, super insulation and, all the things that actually make a building a net zero building, it would probably rank number 13 or 14, actually. So, yeah, it's huge. But we wanted to eliminate double counting. You can't count things twice, and so that's why both of those fell to the bottom. It's because their solutions are already there.
Well, I think even just that first example of cars is pretty indicative because, if you're thinking on maybe your personal scale and you think, okay, cool, I'm going to buy a Prius, a hybrid, and because that's such a big step for me, that should hopefully have a large impact on the larger scale. And it turns out that's not the case. If you magnify or you put that in perspective with these, whether Project Drawdown agrees with the additional 2 billion vehicles on road or not, it's kind of that difference in scale, which I think your book is very good at outlining.
I think we both appreciate that you focused on solutions that we can implement and scale and model, and that you've taken this conservative approach so that people can feel good about it and trust it, and that there's no bias and it's consistent and transparent. And we read that in the solution strength number 3, reduce food waste, I was surprised to learn that that doesn't even include the methane emissions from landfill because the data was too spotty globally. So were there other solutions that there's a similar issue where, wow, we know there's this big impact from it, but we had to exclude this part of it because the data was too spotty? I found that was very interesting, and I'd like to hear if there's other instances.
Well, the number one solution is refrigerant management. Right now we have, HFCs, which replace CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons because of their damage to the ozone layer. So they're replaced with hydrochlorofluorocarbons, which don't damage the ozone layer, but instead are very powerful greenhouse gases from, 146 to 12,500 times more powerful than CO2 in their global warming potential. What we model in there is the rate of leakage and loss. Leakage from bad maintenance and cheap air conditioners and refrigerators, and loss from when they're disassembled and recycled. And these gases go right into the air. What we did not model in there was the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which calls for the phasing out, and it's a treaty, of all HFCs by 2030. The more developed nations doing it sooner, and the lesser developed nations having a longer time to do so. We didn't include that. You include that, it's probably another 70. We've heard different estimates, 70 gigatons of impact, but they were estimates, and so we had no data to really rely upon there, except to point out that it would be much greater. So that was certainly one where the data is much better than what shows. And it's number one now. And of course, as you mentioned, food waste, we didn't measure methanogenesis from, anaerobically landfilled food, or green waste for that matter. And as you know, methane is 28 to 36 times more powerful in its global warming potential than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. And so you add that in, I'm not sure where that number would go, reduced food waste. But suffice to say, they're 1 and 3 now, those two I just mentioned, and so they were to go higher.
Well, what's interesting is, Jay, I know when we were emailing with Paul, we were like, we interviewed Joel Mercauer from GreenBiz and Kate Brandt from Google trying to prove our sustainability bona fides. But maybe we should have said that our second episode was on hydrofluorocarbons, so we knew refrigerant management, was a thing, and then we were doing it early on. So maybe we should have thrown that out there too.
On the case early, but we landed them. So whatever, something worked.
Yeah, no, it's just hidden. It was so interesting when the book came out, though, I have to say. The one industry that just jumped on us in a good way, and still is the refrigeration industry. They just loved it. They were just over the moon. They wanted us to go to conferences and write articles, and and to this day, actually.
So, Paul, let's use what we have in front of us, which is this beautiful copy full of amazing pictures, by the way, of Project Drawdown, and look into...
And great stories, too.
Absolutely.
That's what's great about it, too, that it's very accessible.
And look into the future. So with this book, we now have the top 100 most substantive and proven and currently in use and scalable solutions to reverse global warming. And I think Scott and I think maybe listening to charming sustainability podcasts could have been number 101. But point aside,
it's very cheap.
What do you hope happens next, Paul? What spark do you hope to see catch, or what impact do you hope this body of work has?
Well, I'm not into hope. It's funny because you talked about Joel Mercauer, and I was at GreenBiz 2 years ago, and he was interviewing me on stage. He's a great interviewer, and talking about Drawdown, and it was like, wow. And then the last question, he said, well, then are you hopeful? And I said, not at all. And the audience, it was about 800 people that burst into very nervous laughter, like,
I'm glad Barack Obama, you were not Barack Obama's advisor.
Yeah.
Campaign. And forget the hope thing. It's not working.
Let's be real.
But the reason I say that is because hope is the mask of fear. You can't have hope unless you're afraid of something. And this is a Buddhist concept, and I'm sorry, I'm steeped in that. And so for me, it's just like hope is actually kind of a veil, it's something you put over something, that hides what is really the core problem, which is we're fearful people. And what we need to do is be fearless. So when you talk about asking me questions, what do I hope for in the future? I don't hope for anything at all. I actually just do. And we say this is a do book, Drawdown, by the way. It's like, and the stories are there, and thank you for saying that, but the stories are there because if they're not stories, nobody's going to read it. And we're humans. We love stories. We love finding out that solar panels were first put up in 1884 on a rooftop in New York City, just 2 years after the first coal-fired electrical plant was built in New York. I mean, we love to find out about things and how they work and people and all that sort of stuff. And Drawdown's full of that. But going forward, we have the following. We're doing curriculum development. We'll do a primer for, it's not dumbed down, but it's just shorter, smaller, and more summarized. And that is for grade school, high school, and anybody else who wants to, give somebody a shorter version of it. We're doing a whole research project and book on oceans and ocean solutions. We touched on it a little bit with ocean farming and marine permaculture, but there's many, many more. We're going to do one on food itself, and food is the biggest sector in Drawdown, but we want to do one just on food and food practices and obviously agricultural practices. We're doing a big one on all of Drawdown, the big, more like what you're seeing now in front of you, called Regeneration, How to Create 1 Billion Jobs.
And Paul, this is all great, and we love Drawdown so much, but it's nice to hear that you're already thinking about the next thing and the way to approach it and how to connect it up to some other important issues. And we want to ask you now about this is our final question. We ask every guest this question. And we want to pretend that we're at a party. So we can pretend that we're at I'm sure there'll be a book party when Regeneration comes out. So you can pretend we're there. We've got some nice plant-rich foods to nibble on and some cocktails maybe made from some silvopasture, growing edibles. And we want to impress somebody at this party with one fact, that we can just hit them with real quick and they'll be blown away. What is that one fact about reversing global warming that we want to tell them at the party?
Yeah, I would say that we're sitting on the answer. It's like we're sitting on the answer and we're looking all around for the answer. We're sitting on it. It's right there in front of us.
It's Paul, it's almost like I'm hearing you describe this, and it's like that instance where you're looking for your glasses or you're looking for your phone and you're looking all over the house for it, and then 5 minutes later you realize it's in your hand or you're wearing it. Maybe that's the thing. It's like, we already have all the solutions here, and now it's a matter of kind of reshaping the way we think about our economic system and change a little paradigm there.
Absolutely. And we have 20 coming attractions in the book. These are solutions that are scientifically validated, but are so new that we can't model them. We have 200 more in our database. And so we have to also kind of step back and I guess there's no way to do it for people right now, but step back and know that the solutions we have at hand that are scaling are sufficient under the day to accomplish the task of reversing global warming. But my goodness sakes, they're going to be joined by just dozens and dozens and dozens of brilliant innovations that are happening around the world, from entrepreneurs, from engineers, from scientists, from farmers, and people all over. So I again, it's kind of like we're looking at the darkness and it's real. I'm in no way discounting that, but turn around, also, and look at the light that is the brilliance of humanity.
Well, I will say I'm glad you're not running a movie theater, because if you had dozens and dozens of coming attractions before the movie, I don't know how it would go, I have to say. But, Paul, I just thank you so much for coming on the show and for organizing your solutions here and making it so positive. And it makes me hopeful. I'm sure the listeners will enjoy hearing the origin of it. And I think I speak for Jay when I just say thanks for coming on and giving up some of your valuable time to talk with us.
Absolutely.
A joy. I love talking about it, obviously, and I love talking to you guys. And thank you so much for what you are doing. We say one thing, because people tend to do what we did, which is talk about the quote, quote, big solutions. There is no such thing as a small solution. And there's no such thing as a small podcast. There's no such thing as a small point of realization. It's all small. Everything in nature is small. And we tend, especially in America, to kind of gravitate towards the big, but actually in life, it's the small that determines the big, not the big that determines the small. So thanks so much for what you're doing.
Paul, thanks so much. And we wish you all the best and continued success with Project Drawdown.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, bye.
What if you could help businesses across the U.S. go solar while earning up to 7.5% annually? Since 2015, individuals have invested tens of millions of dollars using Wonder Capital's solar investment platform. These individuals have helped to finance nearly 200 large-scale solar energy projects across the U.S. Alongside individual investors, Wonder also works with financial institutions, like a prominent Wall Street hedge fund that recently invested over $100 million with Wonder. If you're interested in helping businesses go solar while earning up to 7.5% annually, go to wondercapital.com/sustainability. Wonder Capital, where impact investing meets capitalism.
We have a new sponsor on the podcast that we are super excited about, Soapbox. They are a perfect fit because I'm a user and lover of their products, and also because of their sustainability values.
Not to mention, it makes your hair smell like a wild bamboo forest.
I'm not even sure that has a smell, but thanks, my girlfriend Shannon.
Hi, listeners. If you think Scott's jokes are bad on the show...
Okay, so Shannon, would you say that Soapbox products have been critical to our relationship?
Scott, you know how important smell is to me.
Well, if you want to attract a similarly amazing partner, give Soapbox a try. When you buy from Soapbox, you help it meet its mission to empower people to change the world through everyday quality purchases. And you can pick it up at major retailers, including Target, Walmart, and Walgreens. You can also buy it online at soapboxsoaps.com and use the promo code SDPOD with all caps for 10% off.
All right, Scott, the episode is just about done. I think it's time we draw it down. Let's maybe draw down the lights with it and call it a wrap.
Did you just say draw and down? Is that your bad joke for this episode? Because that's bad.
Well, that's the point. It's clearly bad. So let's go with I guess, but the episode's got to end somehow, right?
All right, it's over. So, listeners, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast, because that's how people find us. Also, thanks to Potions and Square Peg Round Hole for providing the music for the show.
We also want to thank Danielle Harrison, who has become an integral part of our marketing efforts. She has just been crushing it, so thank you, Danielle. And, of course, listeners, if you have any questions, comments, episode suggestions, bad jokes we missed, or actually maybe better ways to end this one, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. It's part of what makes this so cool. hosts@sustainabilitydefined.com.
All right, Jay, I think that about does it. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
And I'm Jay Siegel. We will see you next time.